Okay, good morning everyone. I am Melkie Guisingmadali and I will be the one to report animal diversity together with my co-reporters Maria Elizabeth Amolo and Christine Alvarez. So what is animal diversity? To survive and disseminate successfully under various geographical regions, the diversities that have arisen among the animals through adaptations and essential modification of their external and internal morphology, size, shape, behavior, etc. is called animal diversity. So the animal world is large and diversified based on their shape, size, eating habits, habitat, method of reproduction. Animals are grouped into two different categories. So when classifying an organism, we need to first of all look at its body plans because this is going to allow us to put it into one of three categories. There are three categories of body plans: the radial symmetry, bilateral symmetry, and asymmetry. But radial symmetry is defined as the ability to divide an organism into equal parts radiating from a center point. Bilateral symmetry, it involves the division of the animal through a sagittal plane, resulting in two mirror image, right, left halves, such as those of a butterfly, crab, or human body. Animals with a bilateral symmetry have a head and a tail, or the anterior and posterior, front and back, or the dorsal and ventral, and right and left sides. And the last one is asymmetry. It exists when the two halves of something don't match or unequal. So So there is only one asymmetrical organism, that is porifera or sponges. The second option is radial symmetry, which means that no matter which way you cut the pieces, as long as you cut through the center, you will always have the same half on either side, and this is very clearly seen in examples like Nidoria or jellyfish and sea anemones. So as we can see in the picture, the final kind that we are used to seeing is bilateral posterior or posterior bilateral. It is a bilateral symmetry that is where the majority of animals on Earth. And that is simply because if you cut them down, the center of their bodies from the anterior end to the posterior end, they will make two identical copies, or there will be two mirrored sides to each of the organisms. Now this symmetry reveals certain things about the organisms. There are certain advantages for different kinds of symmetry. So as you can see in the picture, no, makita na to ang different examples sa asymmetrical, radial, and bilateral. Asymmetrical is, the example is sponges or porifera, while radial, Nidoria, like jellyfish. And bilateral, mga butterflies, like that. Now, once we've classified our organism by their symmetry, we are going to look at their tissue layers. And besides, sponges are the only ones who don't have either diplo or triploblast. They are just cell layers, so they don't actually have any tissues. So what are the two types of tissue layers? There is hyperblastic and diploblastic. Tripoblastic refers to having three embryonic germinal layers, which is namely ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. While the diploblastic organism refers to having only two embryonic layers, namely ectoderm and endoderm. So the mesoderm is absent in diploblastic. Now, as far as we are going to know, the only organism that is a diploblast is Nidorian. Diploblast means di, which means two, and so that means that there are only two layers, and two tissue layers that we see in diploblast are going to be the endoderm, which is this very central layer that is what is going to grow into the digestive system like stomach and intestines. And then the outermost layer is going to be the ectoderm. And this would grow into the skin, but if one is slightly more complex organism, which actually have a few more of these structures, and that's why that organism is called a triploblast or triplo, meaning tri. You are made out of 3 tissue layers. Starting yet again, you do have an endoderm because you need an endoderm to form your digestive system right in the center. And then you have a middle layer which we call the mesoderm. Now, the mesoderm is really an important layer because that's the layer that you grow all your other organs out of. So that means that your heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, they grow in this particular layer. And if you don't have this layer, you can grow those organs, which means you are not that very complex as an organism. And then last but not the least, the trypoblast also has an ectoderm. And then ectoderm, as we all know, grows into the skin, possibly the nerves of that organism. One thing we didn't mention for now is this non-living layer that we may be able to find in dipoblast. The white, space, the middle part in the dipoblast. And this non-living layer is sometimes what we see in organisms with hydrostatic skeletons like cnidarians or jellyfish. And basically, it's a place for them to store water to give their body shape. So we are done with tissue layers. Now let's talk about coelom. So what is coelom? The coelom is the main body cavity in most animals and is positioned inside the body to surround and contain the digestive tract and other organs in some animals. It is lined with mesothelium. So at this point, we've classified organisms by their body symmetries or plants, and if they have bilateral symmetry, they will be a triploblast. And if they are a triploblast, which means they have 3 tissue layers, they will then have a form of coelom. So what are the 3 different types of coelom? There is acoelomate, pseudocoelomate, and iosocoelomate. So acoelomate have no internal fluid filled body cavity, while pseudocoelomate have a cavity between the inner endoderm and the middle mesoderm body layers. While iosocoelomate having a body with a true coelom are called iosocoelomates or coelomates. A true coelom arises entirely within the mesoderm germ layer and is lined by an epithelial membrane. This membrane also lines the organs within the coelom, connecting and holding them in position while allowing them some free motion. So as we can see the picture, no? As we look into a more detail of the coelom, we can see that we need to know the tissue layers before we understand this topic. And so each of these organisms has an ectoderm on the outside and it has an endoderm on the inside representing its digestive system. The other layer, the mesoderm, as you see in the pink layer, is slightly differently arranged depending on which of the coelom that you have, and so as we move from left to right, we can see how complexities increase. There are, distinction as we see the acoelomate picture, pseudocoelomate picture, and coelomate picture. So these are the examples of coelomate, acoelomate, and pseudocoelomate in animal phyla. Coelomate phyla includes mollusks, annelida, arthropoda, and chordata, while acoelomate includes platyhelminthes, porifera, and cnidaria. Pseudocoelomate also include nematoda. So we are done discussing the tissue layers of the different animals, their body plans or symmetries, their different coeloms. And now we are going to discuss the animal phyla. And I'm going to give the moment to our next reporter, which is Miss Amolo, to report the first four animal phyla, namely Porifera, Nidoria, Platyhelminthes, and Nematoda.
Porifera. They are multicellular organisms that have bodies full of pores and channels allowing water to circulate through them. Porifera, also known as sponges. Sponges came from a variety of places, particularly in aquatic environment and fresh water. They are also a simplest and oldest animal, and they have been very unchanged for a very long time. It's supposed to know that they are not moved. They are sessile, so it means they are stuck to whatever they are growing on. Nadaria. The phylum Nadaria includes soft-bodied stinging animals such as corals, sea anemones, and jellyfish. The phylum name is derived from a Greek word nad o meaning needle, a stinging plant. Nadaria comes in a multitude varieties. The some we are familiar with are jellyfish, corals, and sea anemones. They live with two different body forms. And now, these two body forms that they have either been a medusa or a polyp. They are diplobastic, so they've got two tissue layers. The most defining thing that Nadaria have, something called a nematocyte, are stinging cells and they're very familiar in jellyfish. The next phylum is Platyhelminthes, a group of soft-bodied, usually much-flattened vertebrates. A number of flatworm species are free-living, but about 80% of all flatworms are parasitic, living on or in another organism and securing nourishment from it. Platyhelminthes, this is the most unusual phylum only because it has a mixture of strange characteristics that doesn't make it a complex as its round-worm and annelid cousin, other worms, but it doesn't also make it as simple as perhaps. Now, an example of platyhelminthes are most commonly flatworms. Flatworms are free-living worms that live mostly in aquatic environment in salt water and fresh water. Nematoda, a large phylum or worms with slender and segmented cylindrical bodies including the roundworms, threadworms, and ellworms. They are found abundantly in soil and water, and many are parasites. The nematodes or roundworms constitute the phylum Nematoda, also called Nematelmintes, with plant parasitic nematodes, also known as ellworms. They are a diverse animal phylum inhabiting a broad range of environments. Taxonomically, they are classified along with insect and other molting animals in the clade Ichdyozoa, and unlike flatworms, have tubular digestive system with opening on both ends. Like tardigrades, they have a reduced number of hox genes, but their sister phylum Nematormorpha has kept the ancestral protostome hox genotype, which shows that the reduction has occurred within the nematode phylum.
Good morning, everyone. I am Christine B. Alvarez, and I am going to report about the four parts of animal phylas. Annelida. Annelida are well known for having hydrostatic skeletons. Because of their hydrostatic skeletons, they also need to be very careful with their water and they need moisture to live. So, moisture is really important for gaseous exchange. Now, they are triploblastics, which means they have three tissue layers, and because of that, it also means that they do have a xylem, remember. That means attas have a cavity where they can have lots of specialized, well-developed organs, and they do have civilization. The more complex your organs are, the more likely it is that you will have a brain. Have specialized sensory organs, the less likely your organs. So civilization essentially means that there is an there is an end, a head, and a tail. So the organism and the head has the majority of the sensory organs. Arthropoda, closer to being a more complex organisms, they are actually very complex because they share a lot of characteristics that our own animal group have. An example of arthropoda are insects, spiders, and crabs. And what makes them so defining is their exoskeleton and hard structure on the outside that provides them with protection. Arthropods are the most successful organisms on Earth. They live in every environment. They have managed to live everywhere from the ocean to soil to rainforest. They also successful because they can avoid dehydration. Now they are triploblastic, so they have three tissue layers, which means they have a xylem. Mollusca is the second largest phylum of invertebrate animals after the arthropoda, the members of which are known as mollusks or mollusk. They play a very important role in the lives of humans. They are a source of jewelry as well as food. Mollusks are the largest marine phylum, comprising about 23% of all the named marine organisms. Chordata. It's the most complex organism. It's also the phylum that has the largest organism as well. And that's because as you grow bigger, you need more complex organs, and so they need go hand in hand with one another. Some examples are bird, fish, and mammals. And the defining characteristic of chordatas is that they have an endoskeleton, which means their skeleton is on the inside. We have spinal cord, and, and that spinal cord runs along the dorsal side of our body. In other words, along our back, and you can see this in birds, fish, reptiles. The vertebral column with the spinal cord on the inside runs along the back part of us. Now, this means that we actually have advanced civilization. It means that we have the most well developed sensory organs, the most well developed brains as well. Most of us have around 4 appendages. We are also triploblastic, so we've got the tissue layers because we have a true xylem. It means our organs can be very well developed.